Imagine standing on a quiet beach, right? You pick up a tiny pebble and you toss it into the ocean.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And then, like a week later, a catastrophic tsunami wipes out a coastal city on the exact opposite side of the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you're sitting in your living room, watching the news, and suddenly the authorities just show up at your door. They put you in handcuffs and arrest you for causing the destruction.
Which, I mean, that completely defies every established law of physics.
Right.
We can measure the exact mass of that pebble. We can calculate the kinetic energy of your throw. And we can certainly measure the massive seismic force you'd actually need to generate a tsunami.
Exactly.
But drawing a direct causal link between that tiny pebble and that massive wave,
Yeah.
the physics simply do not allow for it. I mean, the mathematical connection is a literal impossibility.
That's just a total collapse of logic. And yet, when we step out of the physical world and into the realm of digital networks and legal systems, suddenly people are getting locked up for tossing digital pebbles.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you with us today. If you're the kind of learner who, loves those massive aha moments.
Those are the best.
Right. The moments where entirely different fields of study just collide to reveal a truth you never saw coming. Well, this is going to be a masterclass in multidisciplinary thinking.
We are looking at a really extraordinary case today. It's one where hard science, specifically quantum physics, complex systems, and network topology, was used to completely dismantle a legal judgment from the inside out.
The subject of our deep dive is the real-life case of Dr. Chen Jingwan. He's a physicist, a complex systems expert who was ultimately sentenced to 20 months in prison just for retweeting content on Twitter.
20 months.
Yeah. And our mission today is to explore this truly fascinating repository of documents. A user basically took the world's top AI models, so we're talking ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, Gemini, Grok, and Qwen.
All the heavy hitters.
Exactly. And they fed them Dr. Chen's official legal documents alongside his own highly scientific defense that he actually wrote from inside a prison cell.
Which is just incredible context.
It really is. So we are going to look at how these artificial intelligences synthesized, cross-referenced, and validated his arguments.
But, before we go any further, we really need to establish a very clear boundary for you, the listener. The source documents we're diving into today contain highly politically charged content.
Very much so.
Yeah, it deals with the Chinese legal system, state censorship, and political dissent.
That is a crucial point, and we must be explicit here. We are taking absolutely no political sides today, neither left-wing nor right-wing.
Right, not at all.
We are impartially reporting on the structural, legal, and scientific analyses generated by these AI models. We're looking at the math, the network theory, and the legal framework of causality.
Just the mechanics of it.
Exactly. We remain entirely neutral to the political viewpoints expressed within the source documents themselves. Our focus is strictly on how different disciplines analyze the fundamental mechanics of a retweet.
And how AI bridges those different disciplines. We are solely examining the architecture of an argument, stripping away the politics to just look at the underlying logic.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the incredible physics defense that Dr. Chen built, we have to understand the legal foundation of the charge against him.
Right, why he was even arrested.
Yeah, why was a physicist sitting in a cell in the first place? Let's look at the mechanics of the accusation.
So, Dr. Chen was charged with a crime known in the Chinese legal system as picking quarrels and provoking trouble. It's often abbreviated as PXQT.
PXCT.
Yeah, and it functions as somewhat of a catch-all statute.
Yeah.
The specifics of the charge revolve around his use of a virtual private network, or a VPN, to access Twitter.
Because Twitter is restricted in his region, right?
Exactly. And once he was on there, he retweeted various pieces of content.
And when we look at the actual content, we aren't talking about, bomb threats or calls for violence. According to the translated documents, he was retweeting art.
Just drawings, really.
Yeah, specifically things like a comic of an umbrella girl. He was also retweeting some general political opinions and official public statements from the U.S. Embassy.
And the scale of this activity is super vital to understand the AI's analysis here. We are not talking about a mega influencer.
Not at all.
Over the course of several years, he had fewer than 100 followers, and he retweeted fewer than 100 times. His digital footprint was microscopic.
Almost non-existent.
Right. Yet the charge of PXQT in a digital network context explicitly requires the prosecution to prove that the defendant's actions caused severe public disorder.
So the prosecution is claiming this tiny, tiny account caused massive societal chaos.
That's their argument.
When all of this was fed into the AI models, like when ChatGPT and Gemini were asked to look at the prosecution's claims right alongside the actual statutory requirements of the law, what did they find?
Well, the analyses are fascinating because the models didn't just, disagree with the verdict. They systematically deconstructed the four required legal elements for this specific crime. And they found a complete structural failure in the prosecution's case. They looked at the huge gap between the text of the law and how the court actually applied it.
So what was the first element?
Let's look at the first missing element, which is the requirement of spreading false information.
This is where things get philosophically interesting to me, because spreading a fabricated rumor that causes, like, a literal bank run is one thing.
Right, that's a verifiable lie.
Exactly. But how do you legally classify a drawing of a girl with an umbrella, or just a subjective political opinion, as false news?
You fundamentally can't. And that is exactly the structural flaw the AI models pointed out. Gemini's analysis specifically noted that art, political commentary, and subjective opinions are not verifiable facts.
Right.
In scientific and logical terms, they completely lack the attribute of being falsifiable. If a statement cannot be proven true or false, it just cannot legally meet the definition of fabricated information.
It's basically conflating an opinion that the authorities just don't like with a factual, provable lie.
Precisely. And furthermore, when looking at the official U.S. Embassy posts he retweeted, the models noted a major logical paradox in the court's reasoning.
Oh, what kind of paradox?
Well, a regular citizen cannot be expected to have a higher verification capability than an official diplomatic channel.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Plus, the authorities never actually officially debunked those specific posts anyway. You can't punish a citizen for failing to fact-check an embassy when the state itself hasn't fact-checked it.
Okay, so the information itself doesn't even meet the legal definition of fake, but what about the disorder part?
Right, the impact.
Yeah, even if the information was technically legal to say, did his saying it cause actual real chaos?
That brings us to the second missing legal element, which is severe public disorder. The statute isn't just about, a vague feeling of disorder. It actually has quantitative benchmarks.
Like actual numbers they have to hit.
Exactly. To legally qualify as causing severe disorder online, the law generally requires proof of significant virality. For example, the documents note benchmarks like being retweeted 500 times or receiving 5,000 views.
Or causing physical chaos, I assume?
Right, ideally causing actual real-world physical chaos.
But as we established, Dr. Chen had less than 100 followers in total. And, anyone who uses Twitter knows that most of those were likely inactive accounts or bots or people who simply never even saw the post in their feed.
Exactly. And the AI analyses, particularly Copilot's review of the evidentiary record, highlighted that there was zero evidence presented of any real-world disruption.
None at all.
None. There were no network outages, no public protests linked to his account, no panic in the streets. The prosecution simply stated that severe public disorder occurred, but without providing a single metric, data point, or piece of evidence to prove it.
Wow.
It was essentially a predetermined conclusion just masquerading as evidence.
Which is terrifying from a legal standpoint. But, the part of the AI's legal analysis that really stopped me in my tracks was how the court handled subjective intent.
Oh, yeah. That part is wild.
Right. In most modern legal systems, to be guilty of a crime like this, you have to knowingly spread falsehoods with the actual intent to cause trouble.
You have to mean to do it.
Yes. But because there was absolutely no evidence of his malicious intent, the court decided to use his own education against him.
Which is just bizarre.
It is. They stated that because Dr. Chen is a PhD with a high level of education, he, quote, should know right from wrong. They basically weaponized his intelligence to just presume he had malicious intent.
And the models flagged this as a severe violation of basic legal principles. ChatGPT's analysis went really deep on this.
What did it say?
It pointed out that this is an illegal transformation. It takes what might, at worst, be considered negligence and legally transforms it into an intentional crime. And it does this based purely on the identity and demographic of the defendant.
That is like saying a mechanic is automatically guilty of intentionally cutting the brakes on a car just because they understand how the engine works.
That's a perfect analogy.
It's punishing someone based on their status and their knowledge, not their actual provable actions. You can't just say, oh, you're smart, therefore you meant to cause a disaster.
No, you can't. In legal theory, this concept is known as objective imputation. and the AI models were quick to just tear it apart.
Objective imputation.
Right. It is essentially guilt by presumption. It happens when a legal system substitutes the really difficult, rigorous work of actually proving someone's state of mind with a lazy assumption based on their label.
It completely bypasses the burden of proof. It's just a shortcut for the prosecution.
A very dangerous shortcut.
Mm.
Systems often resort to objective imputation because proving intent is hard, time-consuming work.
So they just skip it.
Yeah, by standardizing guilt based on demographic traits like someone's education level, a bureaucratic system can process convictions much faster. But it completely sacrifices justice for efficiency.
So if we look at the AI's summary of the legal case so far, the elements just don't fit. The art isn't fake news, there is no quantifiable public disorder, and the intent was just guessed at using objective imputation.
The house cards.
Exactly. Since the court had zero evidence that his tiny account actually caused this massive severe public disorder, how on earth did they justify the conviction?
Well, they relied on a classic logical fallacy. It's called post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Which translates to what, exactly?
Literally, it means after this, therefore because of this.
Ah, okay.
The court looked at the chronological order of events. Dr. Chen retweeted something. Then, sometime later, they deemed the internet to be in a state of disorder.
So A happened, then B happened.
Right. And because event B followed event A, they just decided event A caused event B.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Dr. Chen isn't a lawyer. He's a complex systems physicist.
But he thinks like one.
Yes. When he saw the court using this flawed post hoc logic, he didn't just argue legal theory. He used the laws of physics, mathematics, and network theory to prove that his actions causing a systemic disruption was a literal physical impossibility.
This is the absolute core of the repository we are looking at today, and it is just a brilliant strategy. He realized the legal avenues were closed, so he shifted entirely to the hard sciences.
The ultimate pivot.
It really was. The AI models, specifically DeepSeek, Grok, and Quinn, which really excel at mathematical reasoning, validated his three-tiered scientific defense. He systematically sealed off every possible logical escape route for the prosecution.
By breaking down the retweet?
Yes, by breaking down the causality of a retweet on the micro, meso, and macro levels.
Okay, let's walk through this escalating defense, starting with the micro level. The prosecution says his single retweet caused chaos. What happens mathematically the exact moment he hits the retweet button?
So for this, Dr. Chen applied the Galton-Watson process. To give you some context, this is a mathematical branching process originally developed in the 19th century.
What was it used for back then?
It was actually used to study the extinction of aristocratic family names. But today, it perfectly models how information cascades through a digital network.
Oh, that's fascinating.
In this model, you calculate a reproduction number, which is denoted by the Greek letter mu. This basically represents the average number of people who will see a post and then decide to share it again.
That sounds exactly like, the R0 value we hear about in epidemiology when we talk about viral spread.
It's exactly like that.
Right, like if the R0 is above 1, each infected person infects more than one other person and the virus spreads exponentially. But if it's below 1, it eventually just dies out.
It is the exact same underlying mathematics. Because Dr. Chen had almost zero engagement on his account, his mu value was deeply subcritical. It was vastly less than 1.
So it wasn't going anywhere.
Mathematically, according to the extinction theorem within this process, an information chain with a reproduction number less than 1 is not just unlikely to spread, it is 100% guaranteed to die out almost immediately.
Wow, 100%.
It is an absolute mathematical certainty. DeepSeek's analysis verified this completely. His retweet was just a spark in a vacuum. It had absolutely no fuel.
Okay, so the micromath proves his individual tweet dies in a vacuum, but the prosecution isn't accusing him of living in a vacuum, right? They're looking at the internet as a whole.
True.
If his spark dies quickly, how did he prove it couldn't accidentally ignite a larger neighboring network before it burned out? Like, what about the meso level, the structure of the network itself?
To answer that, Dr. Chen utilized Cohen's threshold for scale-free networks.
Scale-free networks?
Yeah. We tend to think of the internet as this flat, even grid where everyone is connected equally.
Mm-hmm.
But internet social networks are scale-free. They have a very specific topography.
How so?
Well, you have a few massive hubs with millions of connections, and then you have billions of tiny nodes with almost none. Dr. Chen's account was what network theorists call a long-tail edge node.
Meaning he's just way out in the digital wilderness, far, far away from any of the hubs.
Exactly. Structurally, a node this small is topologically isolated. Cohen's formula proves mathematically that in a scale-free network, the system is incredibly robust against the actions of edge nodes.
So whatever he does doesn't really register.
Right.
Yeah.
If you activate, remove, or alter an edge node, the overall connectivity of the massive network doesn't even register a blip. The architecture of the network just absorbs the action instantly.
So just to use a traffic analogy here, if the internet is a massive highway system, a mega influencer is like a giant interstate exchange right in the middle of a major city.
Right. Lots of traffic flowing through.
Yeah, and if there's an accident there, the whole city gridlocks. But Dr. Chen's account is basically a dead-end dirt road out in the middle of a desert.
Exactly.
You can do donuts on that dirt road all day long, kicking up as much dust as you want, but it is structurally impossible for that action to cause a multi-car pileup on the interstate. There is literally no physical highway connecting his dirt road to the broader network.
That perfectly captures the meso-level defense. The actual physical topology of the network provided absolute isolation for his actions.
But I know how prosecutors think. They would say, fine, your dirt road is isolated, but the internet did experience severe disorder.
Right? They zoom out.
Exactly. They zoom out to the macro level. They claim a systemic failure actually occurred, and they still want to pin it on him.
And for this final layer of defense, Dr. Chen used the theory of self-organized criticality, or SOC.
Okay, break that down for us.
In complex systems theory, large-scale network avalanches, so things like a massive societal panic, an economic crash, or a viral outrage cycle, those are endogenous.
Let's quickly define that for the listener.
Endogenous means the cause originates from within the system itself as a whole. These avalanches are caused by the entire system's built-up pressure, internal friction, and macro-level instability over time.
It's systemic.
Yes, the disorder is a property of the whole system, not any single part.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. Because anyone who has watched a sci-fi movie knows about the butterfly effect, right?
Oh, the prosecutors love that one.
Couldn't the prosecution just argue that his single retweet, even from a dead-end dirt road, was the flap of the butterfly wings that eventually caused a tornado on the other side of the internet? Like, he could be the tiny trigger for all that endogenous pressure.
It's a great pushback. And the AI models, particularly Grok and DeepSeek, spent significant computational effort addressing this because, like I said, prosecutors do love the butterfly effect metaphor.
Yeah.
But as the AI pointed out, they apply it incorrectly. The butterfly effect, which is technically known as sensitive dependence on initial conditions, only applies if the system is already in a hypercritical, highly unstable state.
So the system has to be rigged to blow already? Like the gas has to be leaking in the room before the spark even matters?
Exactly. The AI models noted a massive category error in the prosecution's logic.
What's a category error?
It's when you assign a property to a thing that cannot possibly possess it. You cannot legally blame a systemic macroscopic failure on a microscopic node without first proving two incredibly difficult things.
Which are?
One, that the entire social network was at the absolute breaking point of instability. And two, that this specific node's action was the exact necessary trigger that pushed it over the edge.
And the prosecution obviously didn't prove either of those things. They just pointed to the background noise of the internet and blamed a micro-level user for it.
Pretty much. As DeepSeek formulated it in its summary, you can't blame a sprawling citywide traffic jam on a single pedestrian's footsteps.
Yeah.
It is just a fundamental misreading of how causality works in complex systems.
The science here is just devastating to the prosecution's case. I mean, Dr. Chen isn't just saying, hey, I didn't do it.
Right.
He is saying the mathematical laws of the physical universe dictate that I literally could not have done it. So what does this all mean?
It's a huge question.
If the legal elements didn't fit, and the mathematics of complex networks proved the crime was physically impossible, how did the conviction actually stand? We have to look at the procedural path of the trial itself to understand how logic was defeated.
This is where the AI analyses shift from physics back to law. Copilot and ChatGPT mapped out a systemic procedural breakdown.
The system failing itself.
Yeah. When the logic didn't work, the bureaucracy simply ignored its own rules to force a conclusion.
Let's walk through that timeline. How did this systemic breakdown even start?
It started at the very moment of arrest. The documents detail allegations of a warrantless police raid, where officers confiscated items completely unrelated to the digital charge,
Like what?
like old physical books and personal notes.
That sounds like a fishing expedition. Just grab everything and, hope something sticks.
Then there are the documented allegations of severe coercion. Dr. Chen detailed a 24-hour interrogation process where he was intentionally deprived of food and sleep until he finally surrendered his passwords.
Which completely contaminates the entire evidentiary chain right from the start. Any confession or access granted under those conditions is inherently unreliable.
Absolutely.
But surely, when a case built in contaminated evidence and flawed physics actually gets to a judge, the process corrects itself, right? I mean, that's what courts are for.
You would hope so, but the AIs found the exact opposite. The first trial was actually held in secret. It was a completely closed-door proceeding.
Right? Really?
Yeah. Now, legally, courts do have provisions to close proceedings, but those are generally reserved for highly sensitive state secrets or severe privacy issues involving minors or active national security threats.
This case involved a physicist retweeting public cartoons and U.S. Embassy press releases. There were zero state secrets involved here.
Exactly. So why close the doors? The models hypothesized that closing the trial effectively stripped Dr. Chen of a public defense.
Because no one could see it.
Right. It shielded the prosecution's glaring lack of evidence from any public or academic scrutiny. It's essentially a mechanism of bureaucratic cover.
Okay, but every modern legal system has an appeals process. The whole point of an appellate court is to look at a messy, secret first trial, look at this brilliant, multi-layered scientific and legal defense that Dr. Chen built, and correct the mistake.
That's the theory.
Right. How did an appellate court uphold a 20-month sentence with all this contradictory science sitting right there on the table?
This is perhaps the most chilling systemic insight extracted by Copilot and Quinn. The appellate court didn't even hold a hearing.
Are you kidding?
No.
Yeah.
The entire second instance was done purely on paper.
Wait, they didn't even let him or his lawyers argue the physics in person.
No, they didn't. But the reasoning the appellate court gave for dismissing the appeal is the real structural failure here.
What was their reasoning?
In their written dismissal, the appellate court stated that they were rejecting the appeal because the defendant failed to provide new evidence of his innocence.
They asked him to prove he was innocent.
They explicitly placed the burden of proof on the defendant to prove a negative.
But that violates the most foundational rule of modern jurisprudence. The burden of proof is always on the prosecution to prove guilt. It is never on the defendant to prove innocence.
Exactly. Quinn's analysis highlighted this as an illegal inversion of the burden of proof.
Why would they do that?
Think about why a bureaucracy operates this way. Bureaucratic inertia means it is almost always safer for a mid-level official to just rubber stamp a flawed lower court decision.
Than to admit they were wrong.
Right. It's riskier to overturn it and admit the system made a mistake.
So they protect the system by demanding the impossible. By demanding Dr. Chen prove that he didn't cause an unmeasurable, invisible public disorder, the court completely destroyed the presumption of innocence.
They locked him in a loop.
Yeah, it solidified a maddening logical loop. You are guilty because you cannot prove that your tiny retweet didn't cause a hypothetical digital tsunami.
It brings us right back to your pebble on the beach analogy from the start. They arrest you for the tsunami, and when you show them the math that says it's physically impossible, they say, well, bring us a new pebble to prove you didn't do it.
Wow.
It just represents a total disconnect between the mechanistic reality of our physical world and the self-preserving machinery of a legal bureaucracy.
Which brings us to why this matters to you listening right now. Most of us will hopefully never find ourselves in Dr. Chen's exact situation.
Hopefully not.
But this isn't just a true crime legal case about one man. This is a profound lesson in how cross-disciplinary thinking exposes the logical blind spots in any argument, in any organization, or in any system.
When a legal system or a corporate policy or even a cultural narrative operates purely on its own internal unchecked logic, it can easily justify absolute absurdities.
It just feeds itself.
Right. But when you force that system to look through multiple lenses, when you apply the hard sciences of physics, probability, and network theory to the social sciences of law and policy, the illusions instantly dissolve. Truth requires cross-examination from outside the bubble.
And there's one final detail from these source documents that I just haven't been able to stop thinking about.
What's that?
Dr. Chen wrote this incredibly complex, multidisciplinary defense. You know, the Galton-Watson math, the Cohen's topology, the legal deconstruction of objective imputation as a literal blood letter from inside a prison cell.
He was fighting for his life.
He poured his genius into proving his innocence to the human system that held him. But the human guards refused to pass it on. The human system silenced the math.
But eventually, somehow, those documents made it out. And the moment they did, a user fed them into these large language models.
And the LLMs instantly saw what the humans refused to see. ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, they all instantly parsed, validated, and synthesized his isolated mathematical cry for justice.
It's incredible when you think about it.
It really is. The artificial intelligence recognized the undeniable logic that human judges actively pushed through and ignored. Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to ponder today.
Let's hear it.
As our human systems become more bureaucratic, more prone to bias, and more willing to ignore logic simply to protect their own inertia and achieve a desired outcome, will future legal systems be forced to integrate AI safety checks?
Like an automated failsafe.
Yeah, not as automated judges, but as neutral logic monitors, just to prevent these exact kinds of human procedural blind spots.
I mean, if an AI can mathematically prove an accusation is a physical impossibility in 3 seconds, can a modern justice system afford to ignore it?
Exactly. So the next time you toss a pebble into the ocean and someone tries to blame you for the tide, remember Dr. Chen, and remember that sometimes you just have to do the math to prove you're not a hurricane. We'll see you on the next deep dive.